I'm Elise and Tripp, a senior video director here at Cramer.
And I'm Tripp Underwood, a creative director at Cramer.
And at Cramer, we work with so many incredibly fascinating people from all over multiple industries.
We have so many great conversations, many that are just too good to keep to ourselves. So now we're sharing them with the world.
Right here from Cramer Studios.
This is Pivot Points.
Cut.
As we've been doing a couple of these episodes, we've really kind of talked big picture about the shape of things to come for events and whatnot. But today we're going to dive down a little bit into a more specific area of a particular style event, and that is Investor Days.
Investors, good. Yeah, I've never done anything for an Investor Day, so I'm very curious.
Personally worked on an Investor Day before, nor do I have the capital to invest in anything. So I'm not the target audience in terms of subject matter expert, but I'm a good subject expert because I need to be educated on this. So today we're excited to have Idalia Rodriguez, a partner and senior advisor with the Arbor Advisory Group. She's awesome. Decades of experience as a corporate investor and public relations officer, and she offers strategic counsel to private and public companies both. And she's also just an expert on creating and executing a really successful Investor Days, which is what we're going to be focused on. And as we mentioned, you and I could use a little brushing up on. So without delaying it any further, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Hello. Welcome. Thank you for being on Pivot Points. I think we're going to have a great discussion today.
Lot to cover, lot to learn.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. So I think starting off Investor Days, everything has become virtual over this past year. I'm curious, what do Investor Days look like from a virtual perspective?
Well, they're all over the place right now. I think we need to, as an industry, have some best practices. Some companies have done an amazing job at creating Investor Days. Many continue to produce Investor Days very similar to a live event. And I don't mean that in a positive way. Okay. I mean that they're
not
taking
interpreting
the approach
it for virtual.
Exactly. The interpretation for virtual is not happening. I think, the old-fashioned way of standing up at a hotel ballroom on a stage with your slides next to you, with a clicker in a suit are gone. I think that experience was flat at that time, and it's even more flat when you're trying to transfer that to the virtual format. For us, we feel that companies need to think of an Investor Day as an investor experience. It should be like if you have a new product and you're gonna launch that product, there's a storyline, right? With that product, there's the beginning, the middle, the end, and that's how Investor Days need to be thought as going forward. Even if you go hybrid, which I think, what we're seeing in our firm is that companies are thinking in places like the East Coast, where a big percentage of the population has been vaccinated, that they will do it in person and they will do it virtual. But it's not just having a live stream of your CEO speaking with a clicker and a big slide. It needs to be an experience. It needs to be videos. It needs to be animated graphics. It needs to show the entire management team. It needs to be a tech talk with your investors. It's communicate with me, tell me your story, and make it compelling.
Right.
And that's how they need to transition.
More production value, more, traditional marketing approach for this very specific idea, because you are asking people to give a very lot of, just like you would a typical consumer or customer, you're asking them to invest in your brand, this time specifically very literally. So you want to create an experience that's going to get them excited about it. So that makes total sense. And prior to the pandemic, what were some things you kind of mentioned things feeling a little flat? Do you mind exploring that a little bit? Like, walk me through what the traditional Investor Day looked like and why you think it's kind of starting to miss the mark, or at least where at its welcome in a 2021 audience.
Well, for most, I think the majority of public companies feel that it's all about messaging, right? So you stand up and you speak to your investors. But so that, I think that's always been fairly flat. You have the production company sitting in the back of the room, just filming the event. And in some cases, it wasn't even filmed. It was just an audio feed, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. So you're not even making a connection to your investor who's watching this, who's listening to you. It's just your voice over, with maybe the benefit of slides, which are all, for the most part, always included. And that was, I think for me, I always felt like for Investor Days, there was an element that was missing, which is having a very highly produced event. The challenge is that companies just didn't want to invest. I mean, a lot of companies do Investor Days in New York. Right, exactly. They do Investor Days in New York City. And as you well know, Investor Days in New York City are really, really expensive. Yeah. I think $250,000, it's a very easy number to drop regardless of your venue, it's just, and it goes from there. So there's sensitivity about spending money. And if you're going to add then the production value of a production company with video, with B-roll, interviewing your customers remotely, showing your capabilities, then that adds to the price cost, point. Right. What we're telling our clients is, you do this event every 18 months, every 2 years. And you think of it as an investment in your storyline, and give it the resources that it needs, both financial and human resources that you need to make sure that this event is executed flawlessly. Because you can take this event and use it in so many ways, right? You can,
it's not a moment
HR
in time.
purposes, for hiring, right? There's just,
it's a long-lasting
properly,
investment.
It becomes an investment, not only in your story, but you can use it in so many ways across your company.
What are your clients' reaction when you say that? Do they buy into it? Do their jaws drop at the idea of trying to rethink something they've done for, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality? Like, where are you seeing pushback? Are people open to that idea of upping the production value and making it more entertainment and experience focused?
Yeah, I think that they are thinking of that it needs to be different. What the interesting feedback that I hear really often is, we're not a fancy company.
We're not Apple. We're not introducing the new iPhone.
Like if you watched the Michaels Investor Day, which was done at their prototype store, that was beautifully executed. In any way, shape, or form, that wasn't fancy. That was just a very sophisticated event that was very beautifully produced. If you look at the Disney event that was done in studio, obviously Disney's a production company, so not everybody has those resources. But for me, that wasn't fancy either. That was just a company putting their best foot forward. Just well executed. Tractor Supply did their third quarter earnings last year, where they, in the middle of the pandemic, it was sort of an investor event, and it was done in a studio, and it wasn't a fancy event, but it was sophisticated. It was well produced. It told the story. It was simple in a really, really good way. Right. Sort of like, it didn't have a lot of bells and whistles, but it was just beautifully executed. Right. And those three events are all very different, but all done extremely well in very different ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The idea of, just because you can't afford pyrotechnics and circus performers, or that's off-brand, doesn't mean that you can just dial it in. That's
not the only type of production that's out there.
There's a very fine line between sophisticatedly subtle and poorly put together. And I think you never want to be on the other side of poorly put together, regardless. No. And with some of the advances we've seen in technology, it's much easier to do high-level execution than it was in previous years as technology has gotten better. Speaking to something you said earlier, I'm very curious to, you talked a little bit about one of the big barriers to putting on a bigger investor day would be the cost of venues, particularly in some of our major U.S. cities. With hybrid events becoming more the norm and technology connecting people, as you and I are talking from two different cities now as we speak, getting better, I feel like that presents a really great opportunity for people to say just because you can't afford a ballroom in New York City doesn't bar you from doing this altogether.
Yeah,
So
there's more creative options to create like more dynamic experiences.
100%. Just curious to see if you could see that kind of permeating the market a little bit more to expand the type of investment days that you see and where they're done from.
In 2022, companies are going, I think they should, not that they have to, right? Have a hybrid event that has the same quality as a well-produced event, in person and virtually. I think for me, somebody to come from California and spend 48 hours in New York to go to one event. Now, most investors who do that kind of trip will have other meetings. They're just not going to come in for one event. But but just traveling from London, from any part of the world to come to New York to see an event, when you can really tell your story so well virtually, I feel it's unnecessary. Or at minimum, you should have both, because what we're finding is that for some of our events that we've done, we had 100 people in a ballroom, 200. When you do it virtually, you get 600 people. We worked on Haynes, and they had 1,000 people.
Wow. And that's the goal
Now,
of these.
it was
Cast a wide net, get people interested, right?
Exactly.
Why would cut yourself off at the knees?
And employees were invited. So employees listened in, and they were a part of that number. But if you watch the Starbucks Day, that was also done virtually. And I think they had over 800 people. Don't quote me on that. That was done about a year ago. But you really reach a wider audience. And I think that's worth that investment.
When you're having those conversations with your clients, I think what really helps them to see beyond like it's going to look good, what helps them really understand that like they need to invest and need to increase, the production value ultimately.
Is it like you got to spend money to make money, like the old adage there?
Yeah, I'm curious what those conversations are like.
The conversation is if you want to set yourself apart from everybody else, you need to do better, right? I mean, I think a portfolio manager is looking at 125 companies. He's not investing, or she, on all 125, but he's investing in a portion of those, and he's keeping an eye on the rest. If your investor day has a very clear message and you've spent the resources to really deliver your story in a really compelling way, where you're showing the breadth of your company through, imagery, videos, every resource that you can use to tell your story, that's going to have more impact than someone who's just standing with a clicker with slides doing a live stream, which is what I consider to be that flat look. And if you take the time to introduce the rest of your management team to that portfolio manager, right? The president of sales, the head of marketing, this all can be accomplished virtually, right? Where you can bring people virtually we've had clients bring people in from London, right? From South America, from Mexico. And to give your audience access to that management team without having to fly anyone over, there's the value, and that's what we tell them. And I also, the advice we give is you need to look like you care.
Yeah.
And when you care about your investors, you give them a very good product.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And that needs an investment.
It also gives them an opportunity to see what they're investing. You're not investing in a logo. You're not investing in a slide that shows a growth trajectory. You're investing in a leadership team, and in some cases, the company down below that you can trust to create the product, service, whatever it is you're thinking about investing in, and take it to that next level. And I think having that breadth of understanding of who is running this company that I'm thinking about investing in just makes a more personal connection. And in my case, if I had that kind of capital, would make me feel a lot more trusting about and a lot more secure in my decision than watching a single presenter in a slide, as you mentioned. I'm a little bit curious. So you're a communications expert and a financial expert, which I'm incredibly jealous of because I can do communications okay, but money is not. I get an allowance from my wife. Like it's not really I'm not allowed to pay the bills because then they'd all get to forgot. So I'm always very jealous of people that can understand numbers and words at the same time. Unpack for me a little bit about this audience. Like we've already talked about, they want to hear more stories and stuff like that. But like when reaching out to an investor audience, what are some things I need to think about as someone that might be one day creating content for this kind of event?
That's a great question.
So the audience for this Investor Day is you are located in Massachusetts, so think of Fidelity, right? Who's in your doorstep there. So they manage trillions of dollars, and that you have someone like a Fidelity, BlackRock, very, very large names, to a small hedge fund that's managing $200 million.
Okay.
This audience needs to, and this is the audience that's looking at many investments to invest in. So you're one of many, many, many companies, thousands of public companies, right, are competing for that money. So the clearer your storyline is and the better your message, the better is the chance that that investor is going to take an interest in your story.
So it's really like that company proving to those investors that like they're worth it and that like
catching their eye like everything else.
Exactly. It's make sure that your message is very clear. Investors don't like complex stories because they require an incredible amount of energy to understand, to understand a complex story. So make sure you're transparent, make sure your story is very clear, and make sure that the investor understands that you have breadth of management, that it's, like not just one or two CEO and the CFO speaking, that something,
like diverse representation
happens. Right. So God forbid something happens to the CEO, that there's a whole management team who can run this company. And I think there's that comfort that investors want from companies, that not only are companies well run, they have the breadth of management, and investors want to see that management team.
What would you say is I love that first. It's very similar to other events we do. Everything you said does not seem very specific to this industry. Be open and clear in your messaging, because complexity, no one has time for it. And just try to humanize what it is you're talking about.
Be specific,
which I think is great. Talking about specifics, what about timing for these things? Like, how long would you say an ideal one should last? Both in person and virtual. We've seen the attention span on virtual in a lot of industries is much shorter, we're finding, than it was for live. So we've kind of shifted that way. Curious if that's the same for this industry where there is so much on the line, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of these events for the past year and a half, and I think 2.5 hours seems to be a good spot.
Okay.
Is that for virtual or live?
Both.
Okay.
Yes. In order to do an event that it's a 4 or 5 hour event, that means that you have a lot to say, and you have a lot of news, and you have some really critical information that you need all that time to communicate. But 2.5 hours, 3 hours, it's a good spot. That seems to be the average these days when I look at these events. With a break, so people can, have time to stop and check email, text coming in.
Recharge.
But recharge, you need to give people a break from the screen.
Oh, yeah. I'm curious, kind of looking forward, because I think hybrid is such like a magnum opus. We don't always know what's going on, but I'm curious, like, you've seen, the benefits of a live in-person investor day. You've kind of seen how it's been executed virtually. I'm curious as to what do you think the future of like hybrid investor days looks like, or what, some investor days could benefit from being virtual rather than being live?
Yeah, I think the benefit of being live is seeing that management team in person and being able to shake her hand or his hand, right? I think the human touch is something that was very missed during the pandemic, right? It's just, so I think that still holding an event live still holds. I think that's having people in the room when it's safe and being able to look at the management in the eye. It's critical. But I think because the pandemic forced us to go virtual so drastically, we, after a month, you build a habit, right? Yep. We were at it for over a year. So I think there is an expectation that you're going to provide that experience virtually. And we recommend it. I think the fact that you can have a wider audience, it's just worth it right there. The fact that you can just showcase people from all over the world who work for you is important. The fact that you can do video. I mean, there's just the virtual world just woke up this very sleepy event that that's been done the same way for years.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be a really great mix of having this hybrid and in person where both audiences are going to benefit equally.
Yeah, it opens kind of like, it became a problem, but now it seems like it's opening up a huge box of opportunities to be able to, create a more dynamic experience.
Yeah, it's just that idea of engaging people. And I think as we all become more used to on-demand content as well, I think that's another great thing, because we are talking about, some of the, as you said, the target audience for this are very busy people, and the chance that they might not be able to make it to this one particular day is very real. But the idea that they can then at least have some sort of touch point with that audience going forward, I imagine would just be a huge boon to getting in front of the right people.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, Idalia, like kind of as we're wrapping up here, what would be kind of your big thing to clients, like who you're trying to convince to like invest in your investor day? What would be like your big thing to say to them beyond just like invest to invest? But like, what would you really say in order, looking hybrid, being able to like even reach a wider range of people? I'm curious what you would say to people kind of now investing in hybrid, because it's just so new. I'm sure some clients are going to be like, I don't know if I want to invest in that. Yeah. What would you say to them?
It's the wider reach. It's being able to reach more minds, right? More investors. Investors, there's I think $1 trillion or more being invested in Midtown Manhattan. Wow. Now that was before the pandemic. Wow. That was probably changed, but
big money.
But there's also there's money all over the world, not just in Manhattan, because we tend to be very focused in Manhattan because there's so much money to invest in there. But I think for me, it's the reach, is having that wider reach, and it's being able to use other elements to tell your story. And for me, that's worth sort of investing the extra financial resources to make sure that you are delivering that really clear message and that you reach a wider audience. I mean, if you think about publicly traded companies, they have 4 quarterly calls a year, which are when they're speaking to their financials for each quarter. And then they do this investor days every 2 years. Those are really the only times, because when you go to a conference, you're limited to a certain audience. When you take this event and you do it in a ballroom, but you also take it out of the ballroom, now you just opened up yourself to so many opportunities. And I think that's worth that extra investment. And we're advising our clients to go in that direction.
Yeah, this is such an eye-opening conversation. I'm really excited to start working on some investor days.
For someone like Cramer, for a production company that, as you said, not traditionally, this is a field where people really haven't put a lot of necessarily creative thought
Yeah.
into. For people like
Or don't see the
Elise-
necessity of it.
Right.
Yeah.
For us that are more on the creative side, this is just another opportunity, another industry that we can kind of go and play in, and to do it with
And
a
with
group.
a strategic focus
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Idalia. This is, again, like we said, a very eye-opening conversation, and we're so happy to have you today.
Yeah, appreciate all your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
$1 trillion in a 4-block radius.
Yes, I know. I wish we knew about this sooner.
We're in
We
the
could
wrong
have
business.
more creativity.
We can pool our lunch money, invest the $575 that we have
Yeah.
between the two.
But no, I think that was so insightful, because I think we often go into these kind of any event, right? Like it needs to be engaging. It needs to be well produced. But I think with this specifically, investment, and there kind of being this like literal money on the line, just having a very strategic focus too about like how to use creativity in order to tell a brand story so that they can get investors. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's certainly not unique to this industry, and I'm actually personally very surprised to hear that people are still reluctant to that. Like
Yeah.
that to me has just become such a big part of corporate communications, regardless of B2B, B2C, whatever it is you're doing. That we were both in the industry a few years ago when storytelling was everywhere. To hear that that's just now kind of making its way into this incredibly lucrative section of the business world.
Tons of opportunity.
It's exciting. It's
Yeah.
exciting. I'd love to try to get one.
Yeah, definitely.
Do my homework. Make sure I get my allowance first for my wife.
Yeah. Speaking of allowance, I think we've allowed our time to be here has come to an end. But like we say always, thank you so much for listening to Pivot Points, and we'll see you next time.